Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 269th of Kouryer podcast. Our today's guest is Miss Victoria Junmei. She's an illustrator and visual artist based in California, United States. And of course, before going to the questions, the captions, you can find the links to her Instagram account, the links to her other links, which is like a card website, which is kind of something like Linktree,
Yeah.
it has all her stuff in it, like portfolio, email address, LinkedIn, and shop as well, which I actually clicked on it. I think it gave me a privacy error, which I think you should, update the
Oh,
domain or,
is the link not working?
no, let me actually say advanced. Let me actually click advanced, hide advanced, proceed to Etsy. Oh, it's an Etsy shop. But the
Yeah.
weird thing is when I clicked on Google Chrome, it gave me a warning, but I just wanted to say this on the podcast as well in case people have problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of cool stickers and keychains and tote bags and stuff like that if you're into anime
Thank
and stuff
you.
like that. You can definitely go purchase it as a gift or something, and they're all actually, I'm not lying, you can check it yourself, they all have like 5-star reviews, so the quality is there. You don't have to worry.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Yes.
my pleasure. And also, yeah, the Twitter and all that good stuff, all that jazz. You can definitely check him out in that links thing I posted in the captions. And with that out of the way, how are we doing today?
Hi, Ramton. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on here, and thank you for so much for having me and also plugging all of my socials. Yes, I do have a shop. It's more like a side hustle thing, just to have something fun to do on the side. Otherwise, I am mostly focused on being an illustrator and trying to solidify my place in the animation industry and entertainment out here in LA.
All right, awesome. And how's the LA art scene been compared to Toronto? Because before we started the podcast, of course, we kind of talked about how you were, born and raised in Toronto, but you just moved in California for work. How do you compare the both art scenes?
Well, Toronto art scene, at least where I was from, frankly, was almost like non-existent. But because I was able to go to school in Rhode Island, school design, I could compare that art scene with the art scene that I have now out here in LA. In the art scene, I would say in Toronto and in Rhode Island, where I went to college, was a lot more fine arts versus out here. It's a lot more like focused on entertainment. I mean, there's upsides and downsides to both of them. One of which, for the more fine artsy scene, is money becomes less of a priority. Versus out here, people are more open to networking and jobs have a higher pay, but then at the same time, it's like quite competitive, and you always feel as if you've got to be doing something more, otherwise, you might be lagging behind, and everybody feels like they have their stuff together.
Yeah, it's a lot more, I think much more intense in LA, right? I haven't been there, so I'm just, assuming from what I've heard from everyone else. Is that correct?
The art scene is a lot more intense. I would say I find a lot more community here. Like I find that the community here is a lot stronger because at least I wasn't aware of any events back when I was in Rhode Island or Toronto where people would meet up and just go out and paint. I know in Toronto they have like warrior painting meetups where people would from different parts of Toronto would meet up and go paint, but I never really had time to go to those. However, when I was out here in LA, I had a lot more friends around my age who were also interested in going painting, so I would go do those instead. And everybody's
Right.
just really friendly in general for art. I have yet to meet someone who's super like egotistic, although if I did, I probably would avoid them.
As we all should.
Yeah.
And well, let's start off with the first signature question of the podcast, which I usually open the episodes with. Give us a little introduction on how you got into the world of visual arts and design. Basically, tell us your origin story of what led you to choose art as a path.
My origin story, that's interesting because so I first started off as not an artist. I was an artist of some sort. I used to do music. I used to be a concert violinist for like the first 13 years of my life. I started playing when I was like around three, no, sorry, when I was five, and I stopped when I was around 15 to focus more on visual arts. I found out I was more of a visual artist than I was a musician because I would actually stay up at night to draw, but I wouldn't stay up to practice my music. that's when I realized that my heart might have been in the wrong place and decided, hey, perhaps I should switch paths. So I became a full time illustrator and I pursued visual arts. I got really skilled with working in all sorts of traditional mediums. And then COVID hit, and I realized that a lot of studios in animation, which was the direction I was moving towards in terms of applying my art skills, I noticed that everybody's working in digital. So I had to catch up, and I learned how to work on an iPad back in 2020, worked with Photoshop and a bunch of other programs like Procreate to create, I guess, illustrations that match a sort of more traditional feel, like the training that I used to have. Right now, I would still say I'm still finding time to create personal work and really build up my personal voice and style. Otherwise, if I had all the time in the world, I might as well just be like a watercolor painter forever, especially with like the rise of AI. I get really scared of doing digital art because, anything can be stolen.
Yeah, like that's a whole can of worms I don't want to talk about that much anymore because like everywhere we go it's just AI, AI, AI. It's just
It's
yeah,
so
it's
tiring.
frustrating. Yeah,
Hmm.
like tiring.
Well,
Yeah, so as you said.
I guess because I came from a more traditional training, I find myself being less afraid of AI, although that might come from a place of ignorance. For me, I think I'm less afraid of AI because at the end of the day, they can't really mimic the hand. Like they can mimic the final look of it. And I've seen like really great AI replications of what watercolor could look like, but at the end of the day, it's still digital print. The most sacred part of art to me is the human hand on paper, and machine cannot do that. Sure, you can get like some sort of machine that can like I guess do pen work, but to really feel the hand control, it just doesn't. It will never translate. Like I genuinely believe that art will always stay alive because there's things of the human hand that are tangible with the paper and material that computers, AI, machines just cannot replicate.
I bet there's someone out there who's taking that as a challenge and tries to do that.
Which I feel like is super unproductive. And to be fair, the whole thing with like AI as well is while I think that AI has its place in visual arts and has its place in art in general, it's not the generative AI. I think generative AI is meant for very early on stuff when you're trying to build up like visuals and you're trying to build up inspiration. I'm not gonna like dog on an artist who is using AI for genuine purposes. I don't think I'm someone who would hate on new technology because I mean, when photography first came, we all thought that it was the end of art. But art survived anyway because artists adapt. So I think artists are highly adaptable despite all the things working and like against us. I don't think it's something we should be afraid of. I'm much more afraid of their generative video things because I think that at that point, when you're generating like video content, that no longer is in any way creative. But I don't see like what the point of creating, like, Sora. I don't see what the heck the point is for Sora other than like maybe fill in gaps for CG. On its own, Sora is extremely damaging and it's like frightening to see what it can do.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about losing our jobs. Like it being in the wrong hands and can be a horrific technology.
Yeah,
But
yeah, like
a lot of
damaging.
people, yeah, a lot of people suggested, like, which I think is a really kind of good idea, that we should make very messed up videos of politicians with Soros, so they
Yeah,
would actually start taking actions to regulate
yeah.
this.
And I don't know what, and there probably are already, but it needs to go viral. Like, we need to get like celebrities to say offensive things.
I mean, not poor celebrities. Imagine, like, someone who's just minding their own businesses. They're like, wait, what? Like, like
Well,
politicians, I think, is a better option, to be honest. And I mean, depends on the celebrity, but that's a whole other topic.
yeah, that's true. But for example, like Taylor Swift definitely has like a huge sway.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right about that. Yeah, she can get Sora treatment. Yeah, sure. But yeah, like just see what happens. But I mean, my 2 cents about this whole issue since 2 years ago has been the same even until now. I'm like, I'm So, all right, so there's two. We're doing art for two main reasons: one, to get a job and make money, and two, because we like it.
Yes.
I'll still like art if I don't get a job from art. I'll
That's
still
what
do
I
it.
think too. I think, at least in the past, in history, I've noticed that a lot of artists, when they talked about their life and their memoirs regarding their idea of art or why they pursued art, many of them had a disposition in which they cared less about making money, which I can see that being a case for a lot of artists nowadays too. We chose this path not because we expected some sort of monetary gain. I mean, it would be nice to live off of your passion, but your passion at the end of the day shouldn't come at the price of what other consumers want you to do.
Oh, totally agree, actually.
Mm,
And yeah, we'll just see what happens. Like, just weird world we live in. I don't know what else to say.
gotcha.
And all right, let's move on to the next topic, which is what is your main branch of design that you're focusing on? And tell us about your experience from the start of it until now. Like previously, you mentioned how you became an artist, but now I want to know, like, what led you to, become an illustrator and visual artist. Because in the introduction I mentioned that
Mm,
that those are your titles mainly. But out of like all of things, like there's concept art, there's like keyframe artist, there's a background artist. But wait, background art, the art of visual artist, which is kind of background, could be part of it. But you get the point. Like out of all of this, what led you to get in this niche? You know?
what got me into the niche of working in animation? Well, first of all, born and like raised on animation. Like I watched all Disney movies, Pixar movies, anime, watched just animation. I genuinely believe that animation is the highest form of film. And I just had like a discussion about this. I think as a medium, animation supersedes all forms of entertainment. And this is a very hot take of mine, and it's definitely very biased considering I also want to work in it. But I think animation, especially in the West, is so disproportionately disgraced. And well, regardless, I speak very highly of animation. I want to work in animation, and although sometimes I consider myself a concept artist as well, um, and I think visual development is more so a title for, I guess, movies and like feature films and TV shows that are animated versus concept art, which fits more in games. But either way, I think I'm just someone who enjoys visually telling stories, which is what an illustrator is. I always tell people I'm a versatile illustrator, so I'd be happy to work in children's books, I'd be happy to do picture books, I'd be happy to work in games, animation, all sorts of things that I think revolve around telling a story. I don't think I enjoy doing something like editorial because with editorial it's like such a vignette or a snapshot of an article that someone else wrote, and to make work for a story that I may or may not feel attached to is not as fulfilling or meaningful. And then I actually first started off as a graphic designer. I had a path as a graphic designer before, but then I realized that, hey, I don't actually enjoy doing graphic design. I'm only doing graphic design because it makes more money. And I realized that just because I'm doing something because it makes more money doesn't mean my work is going to be great. In fact, when I took a course for graphic design, I was later asked by my professor, hey, have you ever considered doing not graphic design and maybe like illustration? Because the final assignment I handed in was so illustration looking that they ended up asking me if I may potentially have passion elsewhere. So it would have been really messed up if I actually liked graphic design, but I didn't. Thankfully, deep down, I didn't like graphic design, and I really took that time to ask myself. And illustration was what I like to do. I don't want to tell people that labels could, I think, pigeonhole an artist. So it's not that I particularly want to niche into just being like a viz dev artist, visual development, concept art only for animation. I always tell people that I'm an illustrator first and foremost, and I just so happen to enjoy working in animation, and I'm working in animation. If at any point animation no longer exists, I don't suddenly stop becoming an illustrator. I will still continue to tell stories through my art.
That's an interesting story, and it's kind of funny. Like a lot of people have started with graphic design, like me included. It's just I think because I think that's the safe option because it has both artistic things and also like it's usually safe and oh people that guy made a lot of money with just making one logo, and we all have that kind of thought pattern I think. But then we realize we see more. We just from afar observe the industry that we love and realize, do I really want to do this? And you keep questioning things.
And it's like it comes from a place of like minimalism, and I don't even enjoy minimalism. And I highly respect people who do graphic design. It's just not for me.
Oh yeah, definitely not just graphic design. For me, like web development, UI, UX, graphic design are in the same category for me. Like in terms of how I like them. Is to me, it's like making MDF cabinets. While at the same time, doing the art that I want to do and I'm doing is like
Mm-hmm.
making wooden sculptures. I'm not saying one is better than the others. Like there's a certain amount of fidelity and art in graphic design and everything else I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned as well. I'm not saying it isn't. It is repetitive. I'm not saying that. But compared to this, for me, it is. It's
Yeah,
not fun.
like it really is to each their own, which is why I think everybody should pursue what they like. Because if you're gonna do this long term, you might as well enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, some people take joy in the process of like solving the puzzle of creating a new logo. It's like a fun little game for them, and I get that.
Yeah,
And listen, it seems simple, but it takes real experience and creativity to come up with new ideas and logos, and it can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes. So yeah.
yeah, that's true. And at least for me, what I think I admire most about a lot of like graphic designers is a lot of them, while they're able to do what the consumer or their client wants them to do, they're still able to inject a little bit of themselves into what they design. I thought about doing like mixing graphic design and illustration at some point. There's this artist I really like that also went to my school, Rhode Island School of Design. Her name is Victoria Junmei, and her work is really phenomenal. And she is an illustrator, but she's worked for like Apple. She's worked for like a bunch of different advertising um, gigs and whatnot. So her work falls into graphic design quite often, despite her mostly doing illustration. So I think what it was I think it was commercial illustration that interested me, not graphic design. And now that I find myself doing more narrative based things, I think it's because I enjoy tackling art that relates to things that are more personal to me. Like ideally, if money was never on the table, I would be doing personal illustrations every single day. I'd be doing art that I think speaks to me all the time without having to think about. Because the thing about visual development, I've seen a lot of portfolios. They would write their like original story and then they would make work for it. But at the end of the day, when you are a concept artist or a visual development artist, you are being hired to do someone else's story, not your own.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah. And speaking of, like everything we talked about, let me actually segue into a question that's kind of, relevant to this topic in a sense.
Mhm.
How does your design process usually go anytime you want to start working on a new piece or a project? Basically, what does the structure of your pipeline usually look like?
So I know a lot of people thumbnail, and I would thumbnail if I have an idea, but like so so my process usually I start with a title. I know this is actually quite unique because a lot of people have a hard time coming up with titles, but because I'm so story based, I think of the title first. Sometimes I will find myself writing down phrases that I think inspire me, and I would have like notepads of like phrases to use as like a title, and then I work from there. Other times, I might have a vision, a very strong, clear image in my mind of what an illustration looks like. And all I have to do is just put it on paper. Right now, that is the hardest process and the messiest because at the end of the day, what's in your mind, it's like not 2020. It's not super clear. It's like a very blurry, drunken version of what the final product might look like. And to put that on paper is hard. Usually I would again do the first method where I come up with a title first and then I like write down what the subject matter would be. Images would pop up in my head. I would describe it. I would describe what I see in the scene. I would describe details. For example, let's say come up with something super random. Let's say we have a girl who finds her missing dog and the joy of reuniting with that dog. So it could be as simple of an illustration as seeing the dog walking back into the girl's arms, and I already see an image, or it could be even more complex, like a play around with perspective. We can have the girl holding a poster, like a missing dog poster, and then like from behind she turns her back and she sees like her dog. So that could be a way more dramatic story than maybe just seeing the dog reuniting with the girl. So there are a lot of like things I would think about when I come up with the story or like the vision. And when I have that vision, I would think about how I can make this more dramatic. But then if making this more dramatic, does it lose the tone? Because the two examples of the illustration just now I mentioned were two completely separate things. Like they felt very different. One is very like soft and warm and melancholic, while the other one is drama, it's dramatic, it's heartbreaking, and there's so much more like perspective or like composition of choices that I have to make in order to make that image work. And sometimes simple, less is more, and you never know. So that's why the creative process really bounces a lot. And thumbnailing ends up being really useful. Other times, I think I might just stick with my first idea. I know that thumbnailing is good because you want to exhaust your options. A lot of times I find myself landing on the first image that popped into my head and just running with that because sometimes those ones are the clearest.
All right, awesome. And well, speaking of, the process that you just mentioned and talked about, I wanted to ask you this as well.
Mm-hmm.
How, like, from the beginning of your journey as an illustrator till now, how could you, summarize the whole idea of style development for yourself? Like, how do you think it developed throughout the style? And for anyone who wants to stand out as an illustrator to make their own art style, like, not make their own art style, develop their own art style, what do you
Mm-hmm.
have to say? Like, what would you suggest, based on your
I have a
experience?
lot. I have a
Because
lot to
it's
say about
because
that.
these days it's very important to stand out, like, as an artist. Doesn't matter, which niche. So
Yeah.
all yours.
I need to drink some water because this is going to be a long. So I think a lot about developing a style because that was something I hyper focused on when I was younger because I was actually such a style chameleon. Actually, no, I wasn't a style chameleon. I was just a mess. Like I did absolutely everything. Different, like I had various types of subject matter. I did all sorts of mediums. I could draw anything. When people ask me what do you like to draw most, I was like, I don't know. I just draw everything. At this point, I would answer, I like drawing environments. But then, like the style part, I should have mentioned earlier in my creative process that every time I work on a new piece, I find myself gravitating towards artists that I admire as like a starting point because some illustrations work better in a more children's book style, like more watercolory and flowy, and some pieces, for example, that are more sci-fi and cyberpunk, would probably need more realistic rendering. And then I would look for artists that do renderings like that. My tip is because there's so many artists out there that do such different things, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by different types of artists. I usually take one or two artists that I really like that fit the feel for what's in my head and put them together, and that becomes something new. For example, one of my pieces, I don't know if you can possibly show anything during the podcast, but one of my most recent pieces was a witch house that I painted. And the style I picked was Studio Ghibli and Arcane, the Riot, TV show. And I mixed those two styles together and it creates something new. It was not like it didn't really fit in either. And like when some people, if someone were to say, "Oh, it doesn't look like Ghibli at all," I'd be fine with that because it was just like a jumping off point. So that's how you build up a style for, I think, one particular project. But I think overall, if you're trying to develop a personal style that's like very uniquely you, my biggest tip for people who are trying to develop that style is if you are, let's say, an illustrator like me for animation and you want to build up a unique style to you, you should look at what other artists do that are not in your field. For example, my biggest inspiration for my style when it comes to working animation is actually children's books because I don't do children's books, but I do really enjoy the way they use the medium or the way they translate traditional mediums into a digital format. So I recommend that people, like, let's say if you really like what fine art illustrators do, like the kind of people who like wood carve. I have a friend who wood carves, and that inspires me a lot too, because I would check out their wood carvings and think about how I can use maybe the negative spaces more, how I can think about layering colors more because they're print make. So I end up thinking about how I can use a limited palette the way they do with like maybe like different layering colors. And that in the end becomes a new style. So I don't think everybody should stick to one particular style like their whole life. I think it's good to be able to be versatile and try new things, especially when you're working in animation. You want to show that you have versatility. But to build that personal style, it should come from somewhere. So take inspiration. I always, this is, I don't mean to be like judgy, but it always shocks me when I speak with an artist who doesn't really have a large mental library of artists that inspire them. Because for me, I can like list off the top of my head 10 artists that have changed my life in terms of how they think. So I just think it's important to not focus on yourself, but look at others first. And naturally, the style will come to you because you're always trying to take a little bit from everyone and combining it to be you, if that makes sense.
Perfect. And we got the title of your episode, How to Stand Out as an Illustrator, right there. You got the answers, folks.
Thank you.
And
I don't know if that's ever been told. Like, I wonder what other people have said, actually. I don't know if that's like a new opinion. I
no, I
doubt it
mean,
is, though, because I feel like I've learned it from someone else.
no, but here's the thing: like the concepts might not be new, but I think it's like the whole thing about a podcast that I really trying to point out to people is that sure, some concepts have been said maybe multiple times, but the way they're said, it sometimes makes it click for some people who haven't been clicked
Yeah.
before. Because for example, let me give you an example. Like motivation books have always been there, even as long as humanity started to write books and print books. But let's say like there was even with the advent of television, there was like a lot of motivational speakers, and it started to gain attraction. That some of them became personalities, but then since then till now, you still get new motivation books and new motivational speakers every couple of months,
Yeah,
and they all
that's
say the
true.
same thing. You have
They
one life,
do.
limited time, hustle, like doing this, all the same things. But the way they say that concept is the reason it might click to some people. And I think it's not about, it's in everything. Like the different perspectives makes you see things more clearly, I think, even if
I
it's
think
on the
it's
same.
good. I think
But I
it's good
think,
that you're. Sorry, go on.
no, sorry, go on.
No, no, no. I was just gonna say. I think it's a good thing that concepts that are strong and good and successful are being repeated, because I think what's important is oftentimes people forget things if they don't get repeated more often. If I think one of my strengths as an artist, surprisingly, is because I actually listen to the advice I'm given. Whenever I get a portfolio review, whenever I go to an artist talk, I genuinely listen. And if they give me advice, I genuinely believe the advice they give me. I've been told by many artists who are older than me and have said, don't worry, don't stress too much. And I actually believe them. I genuinely believe that I really shouldn't stress that much. I really believe that things will work out in the end. And there's nothing I can do to stress other than just to work hard and continue working hard. I think we have a lot to gain from looking back at old lessons we were taught. This is something I've been thinking about recently, which is there's so much we can learn as people if we went back and thought about the things we learned as children. For example, when we were in kindergarten, what are some things that we learned to do? We learned to share. Nowadays, I feel like people are afraid of sharing things. Like they're afraid of sharing maybe like resources for jobs they apply to. They're afraid of sharing their connections, their network. They're afraid of sharing people about their mistakes and all that. They're afraid of sharing just like things that they have because they're constantly afraid of competition. Or like another thing we learned when we're younger is be compassionate or be empathetic, be willing to listen to other people. And nowadays, everybody's so focused on how hard their lives are rather than taking time to get to know people and taking time to get to realize that you're not alone. Other people are also going through things as well, and you would actually move further in life if you work together. So there's so many lessons I think as adults we can actually learn from children in like a younger classroom. That's something I've been thinking about.
Yeah, interesting points right there. And speaking of the artists you listen to and try to learn as much as you can from them, who are some of your favorite artists and designers that have inspired you the most?
I have a mentor. Um, his name is Kang Lee, and he's a great background designer. He was the first teacher I ever had that like taught me background design and made me want to work in animation. He's great. I can probably off the top of my head think of like a lot of like old school Disney concept artists. Like I love Man Arenas. He's a French illustrator. Amer Kevin. He worked on Arcane. I love Armand Serrano. These are all like environment artists now that I think about it. Cat's Eye. I also took her class before. She's like a great background painter, worked on Spider Verse. I'm trying to think because there are a lot of names that I can like go through. Ryo Yambe, a Japanese illustrator, he's very famous for his just black and white drawings. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of some other ones. Again, I think Victor Nye, the artist I mentioned earlier, who was like an illustrator and also a graphic designer. Yeah, I have like bookmarks and bookmarks of artists that I think mean a lot to me. I also meet them at events like Lightbox as well, or I would DM them on Instagram. So at a certain point, they become my friends. But these are people that I think hold to such a high regard that I don't think I would ever be able to know them well enough to call them a friend. So I just like deeply respect them.
All right. And what is the main subject of your artworks and what made them interesting to you?
The main subject of my art. So the thing is, I only recently, like less than a year ago, graduated from college, and this is something that actually stressed me out when I first graduated. I was thinking a lot about like, who am I as an artist outside of the rat wheel of school? Who am I outside of an institution? I think, like a lot of artists, I think I take a lot of inspiration from experiences and nostalgia. I I believe I have a lot of unique experiences that other people have never had. Currently, I'm working on a personal project and personal story that came from childhood memories of a town that no longer exists. As it's some part in China. I used to go there every year in the summertime, and it no long now that I go back, it no longer looks the same. Ever since COVID, I think even before COVID, I got busy in high school and college, and I haven't been able to go back for like the last 6, 7 years. And that town doesn't exist anymore. All the things I liked when I was a child, that thing they don't exist anymore. It feels as if only my brother and I knew that this town ever existed, or like my family. So there are a lot of childhood memories there that I want to illustrate and bring back. I think I think my art is very whimsical right now, a little too whimsical for who I am as a person. So I'm trying to move towards a direction where I tackle a lot more of humanity and philosophy. I am really interested in things like philosophy and also less I guess less happy. I won't say happy. For example, I like stories about loss, like passing, death. Um, those things intrigue me. I'm very curious about stories like of bittersweetness, where we find good despite all the struggles and I guess suffering that we go through, which is quite Buddhist of me now that I think about it. And I'm still at the end of the day having a lot of ideas in my head, but not enough time to put them on paper. But if I were to say my ideal like body of work would be deeply inspired by childhood memories and mundane human experiences and my love for ornamentation and environments and just world building.
All right. And there's a technical question I want to ask you as well. How do you like, for example, in the witches shop, like piece, like in your projects in general? I just said that as an example. How do you manage layers? Like, how many layers does that have, or like, how do you categorize your artworks? Basically, the whole process. And you're muted, by the way, right now.
So my bad. So because I'm a traditional artist, I've always worked on one layer. But then for when I started working on digital, I had to get used to using layers. But even then, I'm very frugal with how many layers I have. So for that one, I kept in mind the foreground, middle, background. What I usually start off with is like after I have all my line art, I have that separated out into like foreground, midground, background. I then also go into like the flat colors. Usually, this is the stage that has the most like layers because each individual item would have their own color. And then if I had to like color slide, I wouldn't be color sliding everything together. It'd be color sliding only specifically that item. However, once I have the flat colors and once I have the lighting loosely mapped out on the foreground, middle ground, background, for example, let's say the add like the color dodge layers and like the multiply layers, all the rough lighting layers done, I merge it all, including the line art, into one layer and I render on top of that. So I continue rendering. I like clip it down and I like render on top of it and create a painting as if it's like I'm working on cellophane glass that they would not cellophane glass, I would like acrylic glass, like back then in animation where they had cells. So I basically would turn these layers into one uniform painting. I think the witch house you were looking at, I think the final amount of layers I had, there was a foreground where the leaves and like the table is. That's one layer. Then I had like the left shelves as another layer, the right shelves another layer, the ground is another layer, and I think one of the tabletops is another layer. So all the big chunked objects are grouped into one layer in the end, and it's just a lot faster for me that way. I wouldn't do that if I were to be on a production because sometimes a production, like the characters obviously move between, or some objects get moved and lifted up. I would take that into account. But if it's for my personal work, I love working on one layer. I like if I could like minimize the amount of layers I have, I try to keep it that way. I don't want to keep all of my like adjustment layers and blending mode layers on for too long. I always try to merge it down eventually and work like a traditional painter.
And also, do you keep a backup of your layers as well before
I do.
you merge them? Yeah,
Yeah, I
of
do.
course. Yeah.
So before I merge, like before any big irreversible change, I duplicate a copy,
All right.
which is
And
a good habit, I think.
of course. And also constantly saving your Photoshop file or just
Yeah,
whatever
I don't
stuff
even
you.
use Photoshop anymore. I use Procreate because I don't have the resources to have a big tablet right now, so I just work on my iPad. But don't tell my employers that.
Yep. And I hope they won't watch this podcast. We'll see. Yeah, the good thing about Procreate right now is that's just a one-time purchase. And yeah, unlike Adobe products, which you have to pay like, God, how many amount per month?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they really want your money, but it's not too bad. It's like $10 a month, but that's still twelve
But
hundred. Well, not
still,
1,200, 120.
yep. But still, like it's a weird practice that's been getting more rampant in the industry. Not just
Yeah, and like
even in
everyone's doing
games.
it.
Games are turning into live service now, and you can't play it single player unless you're online. And they want to do that. They want this platform so they can sell you battle passes and skins and everything, and they make the
Yeah,
game free. But that whole thing becomes, you know, I don't get it. I don't get it. Hope they lose a lot of money on this stuff so they can turn back the time to how things were. You know.
things are so much nicer. Like, and yeah, COVID definitely did a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Did a lot to all of us, to everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And but it's weird. COVID is like I don't want to talk about it too much, but it's such a polarizing thing for a lot of people. It was the best time they had, but for a majority, most I assume it was the worst, darkest time.
It's interesting because like at least for animation during COVID, it was like booming because everybody was at home. We needed a lot of entertainment, so everybody was getting hired left and right. And animation was like everybody was getting jobs everywhere. And then now my year, who graduated after COVID, like sort of loosened up and got better. The studios realize they don't actually have the money and that they've been just printing dollar bills this whole time. So then all these projects are getting canned and it doesn't seem to last. And all of a sudden, everybody realized this industry is super oversaturated, but there's not enough jobs. So everybody is like not getting hired right now. And I think I'm just feeling the, what's it called, the blowback from all the overhiring and just influx like of shows. But that's just how it is. And I think COVID was a good time for, it could be a good time for a lot of people if they took that time to, take care of their health, take care of loved ones, and really focus on what's important to them. I think COVID made a lot of people realize just how quickly life can change. So out of the blue, like one weekend you're celebrating spring break, the next weekend you're like dropping everything, going home, and you're not seeing people for like the next year. And that's sort of nuts, and that kind of woke a lot of people up in realizing that the positions they're in are not positions they want to be in if they were to die right then and there. And I know it sounds really morbid and probably a little insensitive considering there were people who did pass away. And my heart goes out to those families that happened too. But the people who, took that time to really reflect and think about what are things that are meaningful to them. Like I like dropped a lot of friends during that time. I realized that maybe being popular in college doesn't really mean anything if these friends don't think of me, if like during this life like world changing event. So I allowed that to change my paradigm and become a different person. I think I drew a lot during that time too, and really like boosted uh, my skills.
All right. Awesome. And what area beside the area you're interested in right now and working in would you be interested to explore and learn in the future? Like, anything that isn't completely non-art related, by the way.
Oh, like what I want to work on that's not art related?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So that's a great question because recently I came to the conclusion that I do want to have dual income. And besides working in animation, I really, really want to start a stationery business. I've always I've always felt there was a gap in the market in terms of stationery. So in the past, when I wanted to do graphic design, I found myself wanting to do like design stationery because stationery and graphic design kind of like sync up together too. But illustration also syncs up with doing stationery. I'm someone who sees like cute stationery, like notepads and like sticky notes and whatnot, and I would like collect them or I would collect stickers. But the gap in the market that I mentioned I see is I feel a lot of the stationery that's currently being out there. And no shade to the people who make them, but especially Sanrio, like the company Sanrio who does Hello Kitty, Kuromi, Cinnamon Roll, like that's super like cutesy Japanese stationery, super oversaturated. And personally, I want to bring in a slight edge to it that I feel is lacking in the stationery business. So it's still going to be cutesy, but it's not going to be pastel colors. It might be a little bit more black. There'll be more hot pinks and more alternative colors. So I tell people like my pitch would be like, oh, e-girl stationery. Um, but what it really is I think I like doing fashion illustrations. I'm not a character designer by trade because I don't enjoy designing like NPCs, and I think like you don't need that many character designers on a production anyway. So I never got interested in doing character design. However, I do like fashion. So if I can combine my love for fashion design and stationery, I could create like lines and lines of like tote bags, sticker sheets, sticky notes, and you know that I have like the Etsy shop right now. I am currently working with fan merchandise. I would like to branch out and do, personal work and build up a personal stationery shop because it'd be a lot nicer to create my own like IP, create my own characters that I can like draw a lot of rather than, boot off of somebody else's production and somebody else's characters.
Awesome. And well, we reached the final question and section of the podcast, which is called Time Capsule. And of course,
Mm.
I assume we can guess what it's about. So I'm just going to explain. Imagine you only had a couple of minutes, like just a short window of time to summarize the most important and valuable lessons you've learned in life thus far
Yeah.
as a human. I'm not talking about art at all, by the way. What would those be?
So in if I had a few minutes left in my life, what are some things I would say I learned in life? Summarize them? Ooh, I can bullet point the form three things. that I like live by. Does that work? Like my life mottos and things I live by. Number one, work can replace you. Family and friends cannot. So I am definitely someone who prioritizes loved ones and friends and family. If there's a birthday, I'm going to that, even if it means not. Well, I definitely would finish my work too, but family and friends come first. Work can replace you. Life cannot. Second thing, which relates to that, work hard, play a lot harder. I think the work-life balance is incredibly important. Your mental health needs to be taken care of. I think that you can't possibly just constantly be working. Like, we're not machines. All these people who talk about waking up at like 5 a.m. and then like ignoring everyone and just doing your work and grind and work, and then all of a sudden you go to bed at like 7 p.m. after dinner and just like ignore the world and be living your alpha male wolf life. And that's just I just don't think that's possible, because third thing, humans are social creatures. We can't possibly succeed without the people around us. I believe in the social contract. Again, philosophy. John Locke said that everybody has a social contract that we are obligated to follow. We were raised and we grew up in the environment and space that we can right now because the people around us took care of us. And as humans, our purpose, in a sense, is to serve the people who have brought us to the point we are now. Nobody is an island. Nobody is by themselves. We all, at the end of the day, rely on each other, and there's no such thing as being self-made. That was
All
kind of a
right.
lot.
All right. And your first point was work in. Like, could you repeat the first point again? I couldn't
So the
hear
first
that.
one was work can replace you, love cannot. Like family and friends cannot.
Ah. Yep.
So work can replace you, and it's very easy to get caught up. Like, for example, a lot of people think that I gotta make a lot of money so that my kids can go to the best school, see and meet great people, and live in a high class, comfortable society. But then they forget to go to their kids' concert. They forget to go to their kids' baseball games, and then all of a sudden, um, maybe they get laid off, they lose their job and whatnot, and then they're shocked to find out that their kid and their children, or like their family, their parents, their girlfriend, don't seem to be as close, or their friends don't seem to be as close as them. Nobody's taking care of them after work replaced them. But the thing is, if we put a lot of love and thought into the friends around us, because you can show love and affection in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be like spending time, but sometimes just remembering something that your friend said to you about what they wanted, and you kept that in mind. Love comes back to you, but work is a lot less fulfilling other than just monetary need, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, perfect point. And well, with that being said, thank you so much for coming by for this episode. Where can people contact you if they had any questions? Is there an Instagram account? Okay.
Yeah, you can. Please do feel free to hit me up. I love talking more. I love talking to people about art. I love talking to people about life. You can reach out to me on Instagram at Victoria Junmei. It's Victoria Junmei across everything. It's victoriajunmei@gmail.com, victoriajunmei.com for my website, and at Victoria Junmei on Twitter/X and Instagram.
All right, awesome. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry if I looked like a zombie this episode. The weather is minus 2-3 degrees centigrade here, and
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not really
cold.
used to it. It was hard to get out of bed. Jesus.
Well, you did it.
Yeah, and yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it. And as always, if there's any comments, suggestions, or critiques, leave them down in the comment section below. And with that being said, take care, everyone. Stay safe. Till the next episode. Bye bye.
Thank you.